Another day on the great desert began like every other morning in this God-forsaken place. The heroes of this harsh, arduous, and demanding journey woke up just as the pale sun timidly rose above the horizon. They ate modest portions of food, consisting of pork as hard as stone, which was, in reality, rat meat cooked and preserved in salt. They washed it down with dirty water, filtered through a barely functioning device, and took another dose of vaccine to boost their immune systems. As she packed her belongings onto the cart, Carmen carefully watched the dunes, looking toward Assyria. She had a strange feeling that someone was following them. Nonsense, she concluded in her mind, but from time to time she glanced toward the horizon. She knew, however, that somewhere out there, in the Crimson Trail, the banshee and other dark creatures lurked, ready to strike at the moment of doubt. The banshee weren't the only threat. The hermits, shadows among shadows, also wandered the cracked, barren steppes. These shapeless monsters, born from the deaths of travelers, were the embodiment of the darkest and most vile corners of the human soul. They fed on carrion, lurking under dead trees, as dangerous as the desert itself. If the banshee were the echo of the great desert, then the hermits were its claws. The dead land concealed many secrets that a traveler needed to be prepared for,
This time, I'll be ready for any challenge.
Carmen thought, forcing her exhausted body to keep moving. She needed that lie to gain strength, though what hurt her most was that she would have preferred to stay in this place, needing the rest and respite she couldn't afford. She knew their water and food supplies were too meager to last the entire journey, so every minute was worth its weight in gold. However, she lacked the courage to tell her companion because, from the beginning, she knew they'd run out of everything they needed. Meanwhile, the man calmly sifted through the remains of the campfire, trying to salvage what hadn't been consumed by the flames the previous night. Every scrap of dead wood, every drop of water, and every bit of food mattered here. Nothing could go to waste if they were to have even a sliver of a chance to survive this arduous trek. As he gathered the remnants from the ashes, the Nameless One quickly calculated that their supplies wouldn't last the entire journey. He wasn't foolish or naive. He knew Carmen had taken a risky gamble from the start. Today, he had to make a difficult decision: either continue on the path set by the lady archaeologist, or leave her and take the small amount of belongings they had as compensation. A few days ago, when he ventured into the desert's gaping maw, he was confident in his decision, which he had announced to Carmen on the very first evening. He planned to head south, avoiding Assyria and the wrath of Jaeger's gang. But today, he wasn't so sure. He felt obligated to ensure that his companion survived the journey, even if it meant forcefully pulling her away from the dangerous, naive notion that the Green Valley existed.
It's going to be a tough day.
He muttered under his breath.
Don't complain. It's just another day of pulling the cart. We'll manage.
His companion replied, approaching him and taking the pieces of unburned wood from his hands. She carefully placed the charred remains on the cart, then slipped the harness over herself, and officially began another day of their journey. That day was no different from the previous ones. The heat poured from the sky, the red sand irritated the skin, and there was no place for idle chatter. Every grain of strength a person carried within them mattered. The tension was evident in the behavior of both travelers, who were nearing a critical point. For the man, it was the decision to abandon the journey, while for the woman, it was about crossing the symbolic psychological barrier of 7 days, the one that every traveler had told her about by the campfire. They walked, slowly dying of exhaustion. That's how Carmen imagined reality. However, she couldn't reveal these doubts to her companion, lest she give him ammunition for the conversation that would happen that evening. She was wiser and more experienced than many of her peers. She remembered words better than most politicians crafting their lies for different factions. The cart creaked with aging wood. The wheels grated as they trudged over the desert's surface, and the wind howled, tearing through the nooks of the cart and its trinkets. The heavy breathing of the travelers could also be heard. In their ears, their hearts beat like bells, and blood flowed like rapid, muddy rivers. Sweat poured in streams, turning each of their foreheads into a furious waterfall of despair. Torment hung in the air. The heat, the scorching dryness were unbearable, and all around them stretched endless crimson expanses of land. Even the dunes seemed more terrifying that day than usual. The pale gray sun focused its malevolent rays on the stubborn travelers, as if testing their endurance. And it was precisely that endurance that failed Carmen at noon when she fell to her knees. She panted, exhausted, and tears flowed from her eyes like a small child who knew they couldn't go any further. She had overcome many obstacles to take on the challenge of the great desert. She had to lie, flee, and pay tolls to various shady people. She had fought off an attempted assault on a train, endured thefts in the capital, and witnessed the suffering of the youngest. Yet she had never lost her passion or optimism, but now the fatigue and pain that seeped into her bones and muscles finally defeated her. The cold of the night and the heat of the day made her think of surrendering for the first time. She felt angry with herself because she could increasingly hear the voice of her opponent, the desert that tormented her. More and more, she experienced spiteful hallucinations. This wasn't how it was supposed to end, she thought in frustration. I was certain I could do it, she despaired with resignation. Seeing the outstretched hand of the Nameless One, she longed to embrace him like a child clinging to their father, and tell him that she wanted to return to the civilized world, which she had doubts and grievances about. It was a difficult moment for her. It felt like the end of the world, the end of her world, a world of dreams and personal fulfillment. That's how it was supposed to conclude, but the real downfall came a few minutes later in the form of a second cart and human silhouettes. Men and a woman approached unnoticed, taking advantage of the moment of despair. Carmen couldn't stop her tears, still crying out and cursing herself for the vileness of those who dared to walk with their heads in the clouds. The Nameless One, absorbed in trying to comfort his companion, didn't notice the approaching danger. Pragmatism urged him to refrain from telling her not to give up. In such circumstances, they were caught off guard by Jaeger's gang. It's impossible to describe the immense effort Jaeger's people put into catching their prey. The youngest of them, Rufus Francis, resembled an emaciated slave after grueling work on the farm. His gaze was vacant, and his short, stocky frame barely stood on its own. Ethan Woodworth, ravaged by the enormous amounts of herbs he had to take to survive the journey across the great desert, had turned completely gray. His clothes were tattered, and he leaned against the edge of the cart to keep his balance. The once powerful ox had been reduced to a mere shadow. Marvin Rupert, now serving as a draft horse from days gone by, looked like a mindless creature pumped with countless drugs. And that's not an exaggeration. Thanks to a mysterious black woman of unknown origin, his bloodstream was full of suspicious substances that left him in a state of stupor and obedience. He was like a loyal but dazed animal, ready to attack any target designated by his lord and master. It's also worth mentioning Daniel Sills, who had survived the multi-day journey through the Red Desert better than anyone else. He avoided all the herbs and drugs administered by Shelby White, ate the largest portions, drank the most water, and took care of Jaeger's health, knowing that if the king of the underworld died, returning to the farm would be impossible for him. Not only did Shelby White, who spoke with the dead, have conflicts with the Prince of Assyria, Daniel had often shown his ambition, fighting for influence and future power. Everett enjoyed the struggle between Sills and his son Duncan. He saw it as the best political entertainment he could get in this forsaken wilderness, far from civilization. The chase across the desert also left its mark on Shelby herself. Deep furrows and wrinkles had appeared on her face, and her skin, black as night, began to lose its youth. Without her potions and rituals, her beauty was fading at an alarming rate. Day by day, she looked more like the stereotypical witch from folk tales, with an unpleasant stare. By the time they reached the meeting point with the Nameless One and Carmen, White sat on the cart beside Jaeger, who, despite his injury, looked the best among them all. There was still fire and fury in his eyes. His rage gave him the strength to endure. Throughout the journey, he barely slept, imagining the day when he would exact his revenge. He even kept a memento, a bloody hand preserved in a jar of formalin, so he would never forget the humiliation and pain he suffered when he lost his hand, his best hand. And as befitting the boss of all bosses, the leader among leaders, he was the one who broke the silence and shattered Carmen's unease.
I've heard from my people that in Assyria they call me a harbinger of doom. Others say I'm the omen of a storm, and some even call me the devil. But never before have I seen a beauty like you, my dear, weeping before I even arrive. Was it your woman's intuition that told you today would be your judgment day? Or did you, sobbing in the arms of that savage without a name, spot our caravan approaching? It doesn't matter what your reasons are. Only one thing matters. I'm back.
His voice, full of rage, made the two travelers immediately turn their eyes toward the bandits, who tried to look majestic in their gesture of triumph. But fatigue had drained their strength, and they stood like statues, watching the reaction of their future victim. The Nameless One quickly stood up and drew a deck of magical cards from his pocket, carefully observing his opponents, who wielded their divine echoes. He saw the revolver with infinite bullets in Daniel Sill's hands, the green sapphire whip coiled around Marvin Rupert's forearm, and the sharp-edged S-shaped boomerang now held by Rufus Francis. All these men were ready to strike. The scene resembled the mythical duels of the Wild East, where gunslingers faced off on the main street of a town, fighting to the death. The atmosphere was thick, like the air simmering under the pale sun.
Won't you say anything? Nothing at all.
Jaeger shouted, growing impatient with the Nameless One's silence.
Judging by your men and the place where we've met, I doubt you came here to talk,
replied the man in the cowboy hat coldly.
Maybe not, but courtesy and good manners dictate that we decorate this moment with a few unnecessary words. Isn't it worth commemorating this day, this hour, these minutes to come? After all, one of us will die.
Death can't be commemorated. It can't be made more glorious or memorable. Death is death. It's ugly no matter whose hand it comes from.
What wise words. See, you can speak when you want to.
While Everett and the Nameless One engaged in this futile conversation, Shelby White leaped off the cart. She had just finished painting ancient war symbols in white paint on her bare skin. She then drank a concoction that smelled of carrion, and her eyes turned dull and lifeless. She stepped into a forgotten realm accessible only to witches, ready to attack the man with all her knowledge and magic, even if it meant incurring another debt from the dead.
If I were you, I wouldn't do that,
the Nameless One warned, taking a defensive stance to shield the defenseless Carmen. The girl, paralyzed with fear, could only stare blankly at the unfolding scene.
Spirits are vile and greedy. Sooner or later, they'll demand too much.
Maybe they're vindictive and vile, but right now they demand only one thing: your blood.
Shelby answered, her voice altered, as if 10 different people spoke in unison.
What do the damned say then?
These dead, eternally hungry, bodiless ones tell me they know you. They whisper that it's time for you to return to the cursed realm. I intend to fulfill that contract.
A graphite-colored smoke began to envelop the witch's body, and the drawn runes faded, resembling the pale sun hanging above their heads. There was no telling what Shelby White had sacrificed this time to fulfill her desires. She had already given up beauty, health, and a kidney to prolong her life and learn ancient secrets. What else could she offer to beings with an insatiable hunger?
Spirits will say whatever you want to hear to seal more contracts with them. You might hide that truth from your companions, but not from me. You've already sacrificed much, mingling with forces that go beyond human comprehension. Was it worth it?
The Nameless One threw the question at her with chilling calmness. At that moment, Everett stepped down from the cart, positioning himself between Shelby and the Nameless One, enraged that anyone dared to ignore his presence. He struck his cane against the ground, and it trembled beneath his feet, reminding everyone present that he was the leading actor in this performance. He might be missing his right hand, his skin taut from malnourishment, his eyes perpetually bloodshot from the grains of red sand, but he was still the living, raging Jaeger.
Was it worth it?
He interjected.
Great question. Look at this cursed place. Look at the great desert and the wandering dunes. Look at me and my men. Look at yourself and that miserable woman hiding behind you. Tell me, was it worth it? Was it worth playing the hero? Was it worth it?
Do you really expect an honest answer from me?
Answer me. Was it worth it?
No, it wasn't worth listening to John Marlowe. It wasn't worth giving in to greed for a few non-existent imperial coins. It wasn't worth chasing us across the great desert. It wasn't worth it, Everett Yeager. And I'm afraid you'll soon find out for yourself.
These words infuriated Jaeger. He grabbed his artifact with his left hand and struck it against the ground again, as if trying to show everyone his fury, a fury as powerful as the desert itself. The gang leader shouted the order to attack, but no one obeyed him. Instead, he heard the roar of drilling machines, the sound he remembered from his youth when they bored into the rocks in the mountains of Edenia, where he grew up. That unsettling noise grew louder, approaching him, bringing back memories of black smoke billowing from the exhaust pipes of steel beasts. He could taste the metallic flavor of coal dust on his tongue and smell the scent of fumes in his nostrils. In an instant, he was transported back decades, to a time when life was harsh, barren, and short, like the lives of miners working in the mines of the Empire. Edenia had toughened Everett, shaped him, raised him, and molded him in its image. As the son of a miner and a prostitute, Jaeger had been tested by life from an early age. By his teenage years, he had already formed his first gang, robbing the rich and terrorizing the poor. At 13, he killed his first man, and it filled him with pride. Why then did he remember his beginnings at this moment? Why did the image of a steel machine drilling into rocks and swirling black smoke appear in his mind? Turning around, he found the answer. He might have been a brute, feared like the devil himself by most. But on the desert, there's only one true devil. What he saw filled him with a profound sense of awe and respect for the Crimson Beast. He understood why his men had ignored his command and, instead of attacking the Nameless One, stood in shock. Marvin was shaking like jelly. Rufus was crying in terror. Daniel had resigned himself to his fate, and Shelby White was trying to curry favor with the dead to save herself. Only Ethan sat calmly, seemingly prepared for what was to come. The Nameless One and Carmen took cover under their cart, trying to create a makeshift shelter in those final moments. But is there any true refuge on this Red Sea of sand when Judgment Day arrives? And it was Judgment Day that everyone thought of as they watched the enormous storm wall approaching, covering the entire horizon. A force beyond imagination advanced toward the brave souls who were foolish enough to challenge the great desert. Carmen Phoenix had often come across documents and accounts of travelers who wrote about an extremely rare phenomenon called the Wrath of the Desert. It resembled dozens of tornadoes merging into one gigantic organism that carried with it a blood-red fury, sweeping away everything and everyone in its path. There was no escape from it, no prayers to long-gone gods, nor pleas to the damned dead could stop this force of nature. In just a minute, the terrifying sandstorm engulfed more human lives,